Hello and welcome to Simply Sequoia. I'm Sequoia, and currently we are reading the Brain Saver series by Anthony Williams, the medical medium. This is Brain Saver, and we're on chapter 34 called Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, the medical industry has trained health professionals to try to speak the language of people with OCD by naming all of its specific and rare symptoms. This makes an individual with OCD believe the industry knows all about their specific condition. Digging into the fine print tells a different story. That's when you find that the textbooks, studies, and conferences say OCD is caused by genetics, with the implication being that you're the cause of your OCD. I also have celery juice. Meanwhile, the medical industry knows less about OCD than any other symptom or condition. The truth is that people with OCD have taught the industry everything it knows so far, which boils down to a complicated, sometimes unique, and vast array of symptoms with which someone may suffer. The medical industry's cataloging of OCD symptoms has gone so far that the industry has compiled virtually every mental health disorder, condition, and symptom into the list of OCD symptoms. If you have anxiety, they claim it's your OCD. If you have unexplained sadness, it's your OCD. If you worry about everything at all, about anything at all, you're not called a worrywart anymore, it's your OCD. If you struggle with any of hundreds of symptoms people struggle with emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, it's packaged up as your OCD. Even when serious mental disorders have led to horrible crimes, some of those crimes have been packaged up as these individuals with OCD as the cause. The individual who commit such atrocities do not have OCD. They have other mental conditions that cause them to commit diabolical crimes. For some reason, the medical industry, coupled with the psychiatric and mental health industry, have by design created a massive OCD umbrella and included every mental health condition in it. I say this to protect anyone who's learning the truth about their OCD. People with OCD are not harmful people. They're not bad people. When you hear dangerous, predictory mental illnesses categorized as OCD, realize you're not under that umbrella. You don't purposely do terrible things to others. You're a good individual who's struggling with something you're about to learn more about here. Depression, tic disorders, confusion, anxiety, harming yourself, attempting suicide, bipolar disorder, ADHD, schizophrenia, explosive anger attacks, these are also not OCD. What's happening is that the younger generations are struggling with so many emotional and mental disorders that the industry has created an OCD funnel to place them all into the OCD machine. If someone exhibits the simple nature of doubting themselves, it can be funneled into the OCD category. If someone has a lack of confidence, they claim it's OCD. The medical industry, including the alternative health medical industry, is mixing all these individuals up into one. The industry has created subcategories of OCD so you can find a place where you fit in. This is to make you feel heard and safe, when meanwhile, the industry is far from ever solving or fixing the problem. Your true OCD is still under the OCD umbrella with a whole lot of other subcategories that have nothing to do with OCD. Yes, OCD is real, and it can rise to the level of being completely debilitating and disabling for some people. And yes, many people have mild forms of OCD, and many people have severe forms of OCD. It's not the compassionate, caring therapist's fault that so much else is getting lumped into OCD. It's not the fault of the compassionate, caring psychiatrist, doctors, or counselors either. It's the industry above these professionals, training them to see OCD the way the industry wants them to see OCD. This has led to a tremendous amount of confusion for an OCD sufferer. The medical industry says that people with OCD are only a tiny fraction of our population, yet lumping so many symptoms and conditions into the diagnoses of OCD has made it so that over 95% of our population could be labeled with OCD. It's contradictory. They're even claiming now that being concerned about germs is OCD. If that's the case, then billions of people on the planet who have been concerned about the recent plague have OCD. Being concerned about germs is not OCD. Let me underline that because growing up, I was told that OCD was germaphobes and people who were obsessed with like numbers, as in like they turn off the light and it like didn't feel right, or they like needed to turn off and on the light like 3 times. Like that's what I thought was OCD. Meanwhile, it has become unpopular to classify consistently checking that the stove is off or doors are locked as OCD. Oh, okay, that's what I thought. These conceptions of OCD, along with excessive hand washing, are now deemed inaccurate stereotypes. The truth is that these are still forms of OCD, and people who struggle with this type of OCD should not be ridiculed, undermined, or declassified and told they don't count. Okay, so that's actually what I was always told OCD was. Let's get into how toxic heavy metals play a role with OCD. The most predominant cause of OCD is the presence of toxic heavy metals in the brain, with symptoms increasing due to the release of new chemical industry products. More specifically, OCD often results from a mix of mercury, aluminum, and copper. If you have very mild OCD, you may have less metal, both fewer types of metal and lower quantities of it, and fewer places inside the brain and brainstem. Mercury is the key ingredient for creating notable OCD. Let me write that because I believe mercury is in like that's in fish and everything, since the chemical industry drops their nuclear bombs and their solvents and their chemtrails and stuff into the oceans, and then people eat the fish and then they're eating the mercury. I'm sure there's other ways, but I know that's like one of them. Mercury is the most brain-altering toxic heavy metal. Oh, let me underline that too. And I wanted to underline something else. Oh, that OCD is often a form of mercury, aluminum, and copper. If someone is experiencing another illness caused by toxic heavy metals at the same time, anxiety, depression, brain fog, bipolar, ADHD, a severe eating disorder, the conditions compound each other, creating a form of OCD that's much harder to manage or harness. Toxic heavy metals in the brain, as you've read, could be inherited in part. We can also receive significant exposure to heavy metals in our environments. The placement of the metals, what kind they are, and what combination they're in play a profound role in whether someone develops OCD, anxiety, depression, or all three. It also affects whether the condition is long-standing or temporary, continual, or involving episodes once a year or periodically throughout the year, throughout life. What distinguishes OCD is that it tends to result from larger pockets of metal versus smaller metal particles scattered throughout the brain. OCD is about a concentration of toxic heavy metals in brain tissue. Let me do a little bar on that. The larger deposits, the more severe the OCD. The smaller the deposits, the less severe. With depression or anxiety alone, when an electrical impulse travels down a neuron on a neurotransmitter chemical and reaches brain tissue, the toxic heavy metals won't be such large blockages that they create barriers for the current. Instead, the impulse will be able to travel into the brain tissue. It may be diminished because with depression and anxiety, you often have scattered toxic heavy metals and perhaps neurotoxins in the brain. So the electricity may not be firing quite right. Still, the electricity won't be stopped completely. Or someone with anxiety or depression could have a larger deposit of metal in the brain, creating OCD at the same time. This is why these conditions so commonly get bundled together. Let's talk about why OCD cycles happen. With OCD, the larger nugget of heavy metals is a relative term. This deposit is still on such a minuscule scale that it's impossible to see with the human eye. As the electrical impulse carrying a thought runs across the neuron and attempts to enter brain tissue that has a deposit of metals, the impulse hits the metal directly and starts to bounce back the other way. This reversal of the electrical impulse is what sets the scene for OCD. Heading down the same pathway towards that reversing electrical impulse, there's already another electrical impulse carrying the same thought or another similar thought, like a little ball of fire. It can take more than one electrical impulse to carry a completed thought. This succession of electrical impulses is like if you were driving down the road at 65 miles per hour with other cars behind you and you suddenly slammed on your brakes, threw the car into reverse, and started traveling backward at the same 65 miles per hour while the car behind kept coming at you. Both electrical impulses carrying the thoughts slam into each other in the middle of the neuron highway. As a result, either the electrical impulses explode or the impact causes one electrical impulse to project off the neuron entirely. Because the electrical impulse that held the thought someone was thinking just exploded or got derailed and therefore did not reach its destination, the person feels unsatisfied. This becomes unfinished business in the mind. It prompts the person to obsess because the thought did not finish its journey. So the thought wasn't completely processed. If the electrical impulse doesn't explode and instead bounces off the neuron and dissipates, along with the information within it, high levels of frustration can occur that accompany the OCD. Meanwhile, there's yet another electrical impulse heading down, which hits that same metal deposit wall and heads back the other way. And the same pattern repeats itself. The cycle will repeat itself over and over again until an electrical impulse carrying the thought finds its way around the metal deposit and continues its travel. The variety of repetitive thoughts varies depending upon the variety of metals. What type of metal, of mix of metals, and in which various places in the brain they're located can determine if the thoughts are more reckless or scary, or if these more difficult thoughts have a longer duration. For example, if it's a mercury deposit, mercury tends to bounce electricity further than any other metal. Mercury can project electricity back up the neural pathway with more vigor and strength, creating a larger explosion with the next electrical impulse. An OCD cycle can create enormous stress. After enough minutes or even hours of someone struggling with this repetition, the human brain has the miraculous ability to temporarily withhold the next electrical impulse from running down that neuron. This is because, due to the fever pitch of intense stress upon the brain during an intense OCD cycle, the brain is registering there's a problem in trying to decode it. The brain will wait for the last current to bounce off the metal wall and head back into the brain tissue from where it came and attempt to find another pathway. A prime time for the brain to do this decoding is when someone falls asleep. Falling asleep can be hard when someone is in the fever pitch of an OCD cycle. It usually happens eventually through exhaustion. When someone is sleeping, the brain can rebuild reserves and find the strength to implement this decoding safeguard. Sometimes upon waking, the same thought can restart down the original pathway, leading to another cycle of OCD. Yet for many who struggle with OCD, the sleep allows the thought path to shift completely so that upon waking, a person gets a fresh start, temporarily free of OCD. Let's talk about what OCD feels like. The repeated action of OCD has everything the repeating action of OCD has everything to do with electrical impulses slamming into the metal wall of a deposit. It creates an unfinished feeling, a dissatisfaction with whatever task, thought, or action you're doing at the same time it's happening. Everybody's OCD is different. Whatever daily thought or action, whether wanted or unwanted, you are trying to conceive or achieve, ignore or avoid, if an electrical impulse is obstructed by a heavy metal deposit while you're thinking or doing it, you're going to get the sense that your thought, action, or intention is unfinished. That leads to the urge to redo or rethink it, even if it's already complete. We may repeat a thought, task, intention, or action again and again, even if it's displeasing, even if it seems to feel frightening. Heavy metal deposits, particularly shape-shifting mercury, could be anywhere in the brain, and that affects what someone feels the need to repeat because different areas of the brain may produce different thoughts. One example of an OCD compulsion can take the form of feeling that you didn't completely express a thought. It can feel like you didn't say everything you needed to say, or like you weren't heard, prompting the need to turn around and tell someone what's on your mind. This can happen over and over again as the result of a mercury deposit in the area of the brain used for communication with others. Another example is when a heavy metal deposit is in a part of the brain used for creative expression. This could leave you with the feeling that your paintings are never finished, driving the need to work feverishly on trying to perfect one part of it, or the feeling that you can't get a clothing design out of your system, so you have to remake it over and over, never really feeling it's finished. You could also have more than one variety of OCD at once due to heavy metal deposits in multiple areas, leading to different types of unfinished feelings, thoughts, or actions, both wanted or unwanted. With obsessive and compulsive thoughts and actions, it can feel almost impossible to move forward without repeating them. If someone is interrupted from continuing a repetition, they will often feel anxious because it's unfinished. On top of this, someone with OCD could also have a separate anxiety condition that could get triggered by having OCD. Knowing the frustration that OCD behaviors can cause others in your life probably creates a frustration all on its own for you. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with who you are. The truth is that you can become a prisoner of your OCD. The medical industry wants to call OCD a mental illness. This is not accurate. Someone could have a serious mental illness where they're dangerous to themselves and dangerous to others and also have OCD. Yet OCD is not a mental illness. Let me underline that. OCD is an obstructive physical injury. When people are shot with a bullet, they're not considered sick, they're considered injured, sometimes critically so. A bullet is identified as a foreign body. It's an impediment from an outside source. A toxic heavy metal in the brain is an impediment from an outside source too, not a chronic illness per se. Let me underline that because that is big. OCD can coexist with chronic illness. For instance, if someone with a mercury deposit in the brain creating OCD also has an autoimmune disorder or any other condition at the same time as the OCD, it could make the OCD much more complicated and difficult to live with. Obsessive loops can orient toward worries of, are my symptoms back? Or are my symptoms worse? So that someone almost seems like a hypochondriac. Doctors are more aware of chronic illness now and aren't labeling patients as hypochondriacs as often, at least. Still, if someone has a history of OCD and starts to develop symptoms, they may not be taken so seriously, especially if they start to talk about those symptoms a lot. Not being believed can cause more frustration, anger, and anguish, which doesn't help the OCD survivor heal and instead gives them more unease. And we're actually going to finish this chapter. It's not as long as I originally thought. Let's talk about emotional trauma in OCD. A severe emotional blow can also cause OCD. Depending on an individual's sensitivities, even mild emotional injuries can account for this type of OCD. When you feel intense emotional pain or repeated stress, it creates electrical charges in certain areas of the brain that are being overused due to emotional strain. The intense heat from these electrical impulses burn on a cluster of brain cells and neurons. Neurons become hypersensitive around the area of the burned cluster of brain cells, and that lays the foundation for emotional trauma OCD. This injured cluster of cells develops a callus-like texture in a small area of affected brain tissue, which can occur in various regions of the emotional centers of the brain, depending on the stressor. This callus formation is in place to protect your brain from getting damaged, such as an ischemic stroke, because instead of the callus becoming a thin layer of tissue over the injured area, your brain runs on electrical nerve impulses that dart around billions of nerve pathways. When cell injury occurs, the resulting callus hinders those pathways. The impulses can no longer travel easily and properly through the area of their way to their destination. When electrical impulses can't travel through an area of the brain, on their first attempt, they try again and again and again. Over and over, the impulses try to move forward on a path that has worked in the past, yet is now partially blocked both physically and energetically. You experience this as racing thoughts that obsessively repeat over and over. Eventually, those impulses drive into the blocked tissue, which can change the obsessive pattern. By then, the impulses have lost their strength and their vitality has dissipated. Then new electrical impulses start hitting the blocked tissue, repeating repeatedly all over again, and a new cycle of OCD begins. Emotional trauma OCD can often be outgrown as the years go by. Many people do outgrow it. Then the OCD can come back years later if triggered by a new emotional trauma. Calloused brain tissue can heal naturally over time. You can facilitate the healing process by following the guidance in the further mount of this book, Bringing Back Your Brain, and this book's companion, Brain Saver Protocols, Cleanses, and Recipes. Let's read the last section of the OCD chapter. Healthy neural pathways. We're habit-prone creatures, so even if the underlying problem in the brain that's causing OCD is resolved, that doesn't mean repetitive thoughts and actions will automatically correct themselves right away. It takes time, trust, and willpower. When someone has been living with OCD, sometimes the brain adapts or new tissue growth helps electrical impulses find a different route around a metal deposit. The ultimate way to help the brain is to remove the metals with the heavy metal detox and accompanying cleanses in chapter 44 and 45. Once heavy metals are absent, healing can begin. Many OCD symptoms will minimize. Some may linger and still need more time. Learning to trust the process and focusing on the progress of what symptoms have healed or minimized can help. It really is attainable and doable. Coupled with removing toxic heavy metals, one of the most potent ways to heal OCD is to create new experiences. Many times, people with OCD try to isolate themselves in their routines so they can avoid temptation, fear of acting on unwanted thoughts, unknown variables, or embarrassment. As you cleanse yourself of toxic heavy metal blockages in the brain, you'll want to allow for healthy neural pathways to establish themselves by changing your surroundings and or shaking up old habits. If possible, relocate yourself, even if it's temporary. Even staying at a friend's house for a day or two can result in substantial improvements in brain health for OCD sufferers. If you have OCD symptoms, trust in your ability to heal this stage of being. Know that you can and will be free from this confusing and difficult life circumstance. Now that you know the true, real cause of this disorder, you're that much closer to resolving it. Have patience and ease of heart. You will finally be empowered to break out of the OCD cycle. For specific OCD support beyond what's offered in Bringing Back Your Brain, refer to the Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder protocol in this book's companion, Brain Saver Protocols, Cleanses, and Recipes. Let's end this chapter with a quote. The light does appear at the end of the tunnel, and health freedom is possible. Anthony Williams, medical medium. That is the end of chapter 34, all about OCD. If you enjoyed this reading, go ahead and like and subscribe, and cue the outro. Bye.